Tonight, global banking scare. The Treasury Secretary faces Congress in the wake of the collapse of two banks in the U.S. Plus,
I see Capitol Hill as a missions field.
A leading pro-life group's work with lawmakers in Washington. And Ireland's Christian legacy. And an Irish spiritual awakening.
Ireland still has a call to be a missionary sending nation, and I believe Ireland will fulfill that role again.
All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
A push to boost public confidence to quell fear over America's banking system. Thanks for joining us for Faith Nation in Washington. I'm John Jessup.
And good evening, I'm Jenna Browder. Well, as Americans worry about what's next for the country's banks, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen was on Capitol Hill today to take tough questions from lawmakers. Yellen attempting to ease fears and defend the Biden administration.
Her testimony follows the second largest banking collapse in American history and a White House rescue for their depositors. Congressional correspondent Matt Galka is on Capitol Hill tonight. Matt, how reassuring was Secretary Yellen's message?
Well, John and Jenna, Secretary Yellen essentially tried to stress that the banking system here in the country remains strong, even after the government essentially had to step in and save both Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank so that their customers could get their money. Still, she faced plenty of tough questions from senators on both sides about how both banks got to the point of failure.
I can reassure the members of the committee that our banking system is sound and that Americans can feel confident that their deposits will be there when they need them.
Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen tried to ease fears of a financial collapse. Her comments come after runs on Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank forced federal regulators to step in to protect deposits. Long-term bond investments that lost value crushed SVB.
And I attribute that to the interest rate hikes that we are seeing in the face of the inflation. Am I wrong in that?
Given the interest rate increases that have occurred since those assets, including treasuries and government-backed mortgage-backed securities, they had lost market value.
All right, yeah, and we're on the same page on that then. I appreciate that.
That bank's tech industry clients rushed to withdraw their money, sparking a run that the government tried to step in and stop. The move guaranteed customers money, even those holding above the FDIC-insured amount of $250,000.
Most of us have all seen It's a Wonderful Life. We realized that that money was off in small businesses and startup businesses around the country. Question I have is, who was playing the role of Mr. Potter?
If a bank has an overwhelming run that's spurred by social media or whatever so that it's seeing deposits flee at that pace, a bank can be put at danger of failing.
Yellen defended the administration's efforts as senators pressed about the potential precedent being set by guaranteeing all deposits for the failed banks. Some worried other banks would see it as the new normal and a bailout.
We have a long and storied history of opposing nationalizing the banking system. Do you see this as a step to nationalize the banking system?
Absolutely not. I see this as a step toward stemming contagion that could come from the failure of these banks that would place community banks across the country at great risk of runs.
Now, the banking fiasco dominated this hearing, but it was actually supposed to be about the president's budget requests he recently unveiled. Yellen also addressed inflation and called it the #1 problem for the American economy. John and Jenna.
All right, Matt Galka at the Capitol. Thank you, Matt. And for more on this, let's bring in Mark Hamrick, Washington Bureau Chief and Senior Economic Analyst at Bankrate. Mark, good to have you with us this evening. So Secretary Yellen, she says the banking system is sound. Meanwhile, Washington Post is reporting Wall Street banks and U.S. regulators are rushing to put together some sort of plan to stabilize an ailing First Republican Bank. What do you make of that?
Well, what they're doing is basically shoring up the banking system and helping to move deposits reportedly into that bank, which was the latest to see investors flee and apparently having lost some deposits. Secretary Yellen, among others, trying to reassure Americans that the banking system is safe and sound, and their actions have meant that depositors will be able and are able to get to their money. That's important.
Mark, as you all know, the Federal Reserve meets next week. How is what's happening with the banks impacting the Fed's decision-making process with regard to what they'll do with interest rates?
It makes their decision much more difficult, John, because the Fed, as you know, has recently been very focused on moving interest rates higher in response to high inflation. The latest readings on inflation indicate it's still with us, just not as high as before. And so next Wednesday, when the Federal Reserve makes its announcement, it may well be that they decide not to go with a more aggressive rate hike that had been signaled by Chairman Powell as recently as a week ago. Just today, the European Central Bank raised interest rates by 50 basis points, or 0.5%. And I think this is perhaps a bit of a template for our own Federal Reserve to at least consider. And that is basically said they're going to stand pat for a while and see how the situation develops. The Fed does have a primary responsibility in the sense of working to guarantee financial stability. And that, of course, is taken front and center in recent days.
Mark, we got the latest CPI numbers out this week. Is the takeaway there that inflation isn't going anywhere anytime soon?
Well, it's going lower, Jenna, and the events of the past week will likely contribute to further downward pressure on prices. And that's what you get when the economy is weakening and you have tightening credit. We, of course, have been on alert for the possibility of a recession for at least a half year now. And some people are saying those chances have only risen, but it's too early to say that we're on the verge of that because very recently people have been revising up their estimates for growth in the current first quarter.
Mark, you just mentioned the weak economy on the verge of potential recession. The one bright spot, though, does seem to be jobs. The latest unemployment data out today shows new jobless claims dropped 20,000 last week. Your thoughts on the current job market?
Job market remains strong. There are, of course, a lot of people losing their jobs right now, but the weekly jobless claims data is looked to see just how many of those people are filing new claims for unemployment benefits, and they remain historically low, below 200,000 in 8 of the past 9 weeks. That continues to be remarkable. We'll see whether we see further weakening in the data that measures the job market's health.
All right, Mark Hamrick with Bankrate, as always, good to see you. Thank you so much, Mark.
Thank you, Jenna and John.
Thanks, Mark. A protest at a California university has prompted calls to terminate a high-ranking campus official. The effort comes in response to Stanford Law School students interrupting a speech by conservative federal judge Kyle Duncan, invited by Stanford's Federalist Society. Associate Dean for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Tyrion Steinbach, joined the student-led protest with a lecture of her own.
But for many people in this law school who work here, who study here, and who live here, your advocacy, your opinions from the bench land as absolute disenfranchisement of their rights.
Duncan, who's also calling for Steinbach to be fired, compared her speech to a bizarre therapy session. Stanford Law School has issued a formal apology. And Alex Murray is the Director of Campus Rights Advocacy at the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. She joins us now for more. Alex, I think the general consensus is it's one thing for students to protest the judge who is visiting the campus, but another thing entirely for the Associate Dean. Your thoughts?
Well, a couple different things going on here. It's definitely unusual for, I dare I say, unprecedented for a dean at this high level to come into a shout down as it's happening and effectively encourage the hecklers. Now, of course, protesters are always able to peacefully protest other places on campus, but when you are in a speaking event, it's effectively a closed forum, and you cannot be shouting someone down and just saying, as the protesters here are doing, that it's just counter speech. It's censorship.
So, Alex, was this protest an isolated incident, or are things like this happening at other law school campuses?
Well, this is getting a lot of coverage because it's one of the more extreme ones we've seen. And as you mentioned, we did have a high-level dean, the DEI dean in this case, coming in and saying, we love free speech, but wink and nod to the protesters. I'm kind of glad you're protesting this quote-unquote harmful guy. We have seen similar situations at other law schools, at schools around the country, once a month, a couple times a month sometimes. One of the more troubling trends we've seen just this year is a growing appetite for things like disruption, and even sometimes an appetite for violence to stop controversial speakers from speaking on campus.
You just mentioned the trend and the growing appetite. The Associated Press published an article yesterday that reports that attacks on free speech in general are rising across America. What do you attribute that to?
Well, it's been a tough couple of years, a very polarized couple of years since 2020. When we had, upheaval with George Floyd, COVID, the 2020 presidential election. And since then, there's been something of, a fallout from this reckoning, this polarization in society. And it's getting harder for people to see each other as nuanced, layered humans and find points of commonality. Instead, it's a lot of us versus them. And what we try to encourage at FIRE is, free speech is not a right-wing value or a leftist value. It's not something that one side or another, one religion or another can claim. It's something that belongs to all of us, and that we can use as a tool to work together to see the changes that we want to see in society, to advocate for them. So we're trying to get people to care about free speech as a force for good, as we believe it is.
Alex, where do you see free speech going from here? What lies ahead?
Gosh, well, we're trying to get it to be, a household name in a good way. We want people to understand that free speech is something that can work for them, whatever their values are. My specialty on college campuses, we are working hard to get students, students on college campuses in many ways are some of our future leaders, and we want them to bring those values into society when they graduate.
Alex Morey with the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. We appreciate your thoughts and your insights tonight. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks, Alex.
Thanks for having me.
Well, in the face of ongoing death threats, the Supreme Court is asking Congress to approve more security funding for the justices. The overturning of Roe v. Wade last summer sparked protests in front of their homes for the High Court justices. And the justices have been subject to ongoing threats from pro-abortion activists, including a thwarted assassination attempt on Justice Brett Kavanaugh. In its latest budget, the Supreme Court is requesting lawmakers approve an additional $12.4 million in improved security for justices.
Coming up, mixing policy and purpose. Meet a man tasked with bringing a faith perspective to Capitol Hill.
Welcome back. The Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission, a division of the Southern Baptist Convention, has new leadership.
For Brent Leatherwood, the job balances working with lawmakers while representing some 13 million Southern Baptists. Heather Sells sat down with him and brings us his vision for 2023.
I see Capitol Hill as a missions field.
Brent Leatherwood says that despite polarized politics and gridlock in Washington, there's opportunity here for people of faith to influence policymakers and make a difference.
Not only do we get to advance public policy solutions that we think are grounded in and reflected or reflect scriptural truths, but we get to minister to elected officials.
The Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission tackles some of the most contentious issues of the day. That includes abortion, immigration reform, and religious liberty. On Capitol Hill, that can include pushing against taxpayer funding for abortion, advocating for immigrant children, and fighting for religious liberty. It is also monitoring 2 Supreme Court cases that could alter workplace religious freedom. One involves a graphic artist seeking the right to say no to creating for gay weddings, and the other, a mail carrier who wants Sundays off for worship.
Religious accommodation, conscience accommodations, that's, I think, more and more going to be a part of our dialogue in the public square.
At the same time, Leatherwood and other Baptist leaders are acutely aware of the convention's sex abuse crisis that surfaced in 2019.
If we don't address it, if we don't make our churches safe for survivors and safe from abuse, it undermines our ability to be effective messengers of the gospel.
Many survivors worked for years to get the denomination's attention. Now they're frustrated with the slow pace of its task force on abuse, although Leatherwood says there's a reason for it.
This isn't just a simple fix, and then we can say, okay, we're done. No, we're in this for the long haul, and we're going to take methodical, scriptural, guided steps to ensure that we get this right.
Leatherwood took over last fall. He is a policy veteran and former executive director of the Tennessee Republican Party. He maintains his group works both sides of the aisle, and in an era known for wide-sweeping political polarization and despair, he says believers can model a better way.
We're living in chaotic times, and in my sense, from my perspective, the gospel actually helps to settle you, because you know that this is a story and we play a role in it and we know how it all ends.
Reporting in Washington, D.C., Heather Sells, CBN News.
Thank you, Heather. Coming up, Christianity dying at record speed and the mission to revive it. We'll show you where it's happening right after this. Welcome back. A little bit of a history lesson for us. In 5th century, a missionary landed on the pagan island of Ireland to proclaim the gospel. He would become known as St. Patrick, and his ministry transformed Ireland into one of the most Christian nations in the world.
Today, few people there attend church, but as Dale Hurd reports, a new generation of missionaries is bringing the gospel back.
If there were a symbol of what happened to faith in Ireland, it might be this: the Church of the Annunciation just outside of Dublin. It used to be one of the largest church buildings in all Ireland, but it's been demolished because so few people attended services. Anyone over 50 in Ireland can still remember a nation where almost everyone went to church, but today live in a nation where in some areas almost no one goes to church. The Christian faith that has dominated Ireland for centuries died with surprising speed. And as one leader put it, today for the Irish, God has become irrelevant. They not only walked away from the church, they legalized same-sex marriage, abortion, and elected an openly gay prime minister. Nick Park heads Ireland's Evangelical Alliance.
It was very much a cultural religion. Well, they were Catholic because they were Irish, and the two were seen as synonymous.
We were very arrogant as a church.
Paddy Monaghan helps lead the Evangelical Catholic Initiative.
Sadly, it's taken the two referendums that we both lost, one on same-sex marriage, one on abortion, to bring home to the Catholic Church in Ireland that they're now a minority church.
Church buildings abandoned, some Catholic seminaries almost empty. One clergyman wrote that the battle for faith in Ireland has been lost. But a new church is rising. This is the largest church in Ireland, and it is Romanian Pentecostal. The worshippers at Betania or Bethany Church came to Ireland to find work, but now realize they were sent to Ireland as missionaries. Betania Church is exploding and is worshiping in a new $8 million facility. I talked to two of the pastors while the building was under construction.
We're praying for this country, we're fasting for this country, and I think God has a plan with us to be a blessing for this country, and more people to know God and to be saved in this country, because God loves Ireland.
We realized God has a greater plan, a bigger purpose for our lives, to deliver His message and His kingdom works for this country.
Betel, another Romanian Pentecostal church, is also among the largest churches in Ireland. Betania Pastor Georgia remembers when nations like Ireland sent Bibles to communist Romania.
And those Bibles are coming back now.
African churches are also growing. The Nigerian Redeemed Christian Church of God has grown to more than 100 churches in Ireland with several thousand members. And even though most Irish have rejected the institutional church, polls show many still believe the core of the gospel.
Among Irish youth, I think it's something like 70% of them said they really believed Jesus rose from the dead. They really believed in heaven and hell. They really believed that Jesus was the incarnate Son of God. So you've still got these very high rates of belief in the facts of the gospel.
When we were choked by religion and institutionalism, there wasn't much life. But now that we have those institutions crumbling, I think that we're in the land of opportunity.
Monahan says the Spirit is moving in some Catholic churches as well.
Do you know there's a spiritual awakening happening in this country? And some parish priests are really becoming born again, filled with the Holy Spirit and getting a vision for what's possible. There's that spiritual heritage within this nation that I believe the enemy, Satan, wants to destroy. But I believe it's going to happen again.
Ireland, once a mission field, then a base for missions, has become a mission field again.
So we are seeing such an explosion of Christianity, but I believe the gifts and callings of God are without repentance. And Ireland still has a call to be a missionary sending nation, and I believe Ireland will fulfill that role again.
Dale Hurd, CBN News, Dublin.
Thank you, Dale. Well, for more on the life of St. Patrick, head to the CBN Family app and check out the CBN film, I Am Patrick. The movie uses historical reenactments, expert interviews, and Patrick's own writings to tell the story of his journey from man to saint.
The American Kennel Club names the new leader of the pack. Next on Faith Nation. Finally tonight, Move Over Labs. There is a new top dog in town.
For the first time in 3 decades, America has a new favorite breed. The American Kennel Club says French Bulldogs have dethroned Labrador Retrievers as the most popular purebred dog breed in the country. Let me try that again. Purebred dog breed in the country. Frenchies are known as comical, friendly, and loving companions, which may be why one took home Best in Show last year.
It's not shocking, given ownership trends, people wanting something that's adaptable. And the Frenchie does have a lot of that for many people because it's not a big dog and it is an adaptable dog and it doesn't require a lot of exercise.
The French Bulldog takes the place of Labs, which topped the list for 31 years straight. I loved the shot of the one who was tuckered out just like
Yeah, he had enough. Long week.
Long week. Well, that's going to do it for tonight's Faith Nation.
Have a great evening.